Hello and welcome to Wednesday, February 12th. Today we're going to talk about connection pooling, specifically connection pooling with the SQL Server data provider. The SQL data provider has built-in support for connection pooling, which basically means that it will keep connections to the database around even if your application seems to be through with them, just in case it requests another connection in the future, in which case it won't have to recreate the connection, which is expensive in terms of processing power and time. And if, for example, there are 2 or 3 connections required to be open for the application, it will keep those 2 to 3 connections available in case it needs them in the future. Once a sufficient time has elapsed and it realizes that it doesn't need the connection open anymore, it will conserve connections on SQL Server by shutting all the connection pools down. To kind of illustrate how it works, let's start by actually building a little application that basically has 3 connections, con2, and con3, and we'll do various things. And I'll even show how disposing of a connection really doesn't change anything. You can't circumvent the connection pooling by calling the dispose method. So let's go ahead and run our application. And before we actually start clicking buttons, I have the SQL Profiler open, and now let's start recording what happens. This will tell us every time that a new connection is created within our application. So let's go ahead, pull this down here so we can see, and click Connection Open, for example, and you can see barely it says Audit Login, Network Protocol, Application.NET SQL Client, NT username Bob, login name desktop, and so on. So now that we have one connection open, let's go ahead and close that connection. And now let's open up a second connection to the database. And when I click it, notice that nothing really happened. Why? Because our connection to the database is pooled, meaning that although we close the connection from our code's perspective, from the SQL data provider perspective, it knew that we might need another connection again, so it just left it open. So now what happens if I have the second connection open and I go to open yet a third connection? Notice that it does open up a new connection, so we have another audit login. And so now if we close both of these and then click open, open, now what will happen if I click the third open? It will create another one. Why? Because we have 3 connections open, and up to this point it only had 2 connections pooled. So now we can hit close, 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 dispose. Notice that nothing happens whenever I shut down my application. Notice that it logged out all 3 of those connections. However, there are some caveats when working with connection pooling. Connection pooling depends on the connection string being exactly the same for all of the connections that you hope to pool. So if even one character is off between this connection object's connection string and this connection object's connection string, then they will be treated as 2 separate connection pools, meaning that our application will open 2 physically different connections to the database. So the first tip is that you want to make sure that your connection strings are exactly the same, and one way that you can accomplish that is actually through the use of the dynamic properties and mapping the connection string, for example, to a configuration file. That's one way to make sure that all your connections are the same and you take advantage of connection pooling. The other way that you take advantage of connection pooling is to only keep connections open for the brief period of time that you actually need them. As you saw from our example, we had one connection open, but before we closed it, we clicked on a second connection open to the exact same data source. And then as a result, what happened? It actually opened up a second connection to the database. It couldn't use the existing one that was open. It needed to open a new one. So if in our code we had immediately closed the connection after we opened it and then try to open a second one, then it would close. I'm sorry, it would not require a new connection being opened to the database. Now one last thing that I'd like to point out to you is that there's a great topic in the help about this, connection pooling for SQL Server.NET data provider. Please look this tip up, because near the middle to bottom it gives you a set of connection pooling options that you can set in the connection string, which allow you to have a little more control over how connection pooling is how it works. For example, the connection lifetime, you can set the exact number of seconds that the connection should be open before it closes it automatically in the connection pool. And things like connection reset and the max pool size, how many connections should be allowed in the pool before the pool throws an exception, and so on. And you can even set whether or not you want to allow pooling in the first place. So again, I'd highly recommend you take a look at this help topic if this is of interest to you. If you want the code to today's .NET tip, it's available to Gold members. Becoming a Gold member means that you get access to every video that we've ever created on this site, which amounts to over 40 hours of videos, plus the source code for most of the videos. So I hope this tip was helpful. Come back tomorrow for another .NET video tip, and I wish you an exception-free day.